Bruce, you must have something really good too.
Of course I do. It's Bruce Danielson, and I guess I'm here to entertain you too.
Good afternoon and welcome to your Sioux Falls City Council informational meeting. Today is Tuesday, January 8th. We will call this meeting to order. We will start with our first item of committee commission report, Siouxland Heritage Museum Board. That was held on Thursday, January 3rd. Councilor Starr, you are up.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It was a quick meeting and an interesting meeting. There were some behind the scene things at the old courthouse that really threw off the day and the director's day, but wanted to focus on a couple of things. One that was a big point of discussion is that 73% of the collection has been moved out to the new location. So my first question was basically is what kind of things are going on so that people can access the collection better. And so we spent some time talking about there are some behind the scene tours that are coming up. There's an Ollie class that's actually going to be held out at the new Irene Hall Center. There's also a way to, the entire collection is searchable, and there's plenty of help from the Siouxland Heritage Museum staff to do that. So the other main thing that was of interest was starting the long-range planning process that the museum and the museum board is going to be partaking in over the course of the next year that this council funded. So having an idea now that the collection building and storage building is there, and to continue to look at programming, and I think that was a big thing behind this council's goal of getting that new building built, was we have this huge collection, but being able to use it and have access to it, and now we have that ability. So getting that word out to the public that those archives are there and are searchable and usable no matter what type of history project you're working on. So those were the two kind of big things. And then the obviously financials with the new budget year starting January 1, there wasn't by the 3rd, there wasn't a lot of expenditures that had been made by that point. So with the holiday, so good group, and I think things are going well with the organization. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor. Any questions for Councilor Starr? Okay. Seeing none, we'll move to the next item, the administration communication we do not have again today. And so we will move to City Council open discussion. Any items for open discussion? Councilor Selberg.
Thank you, Madam Chair. A week from today at 6 o'clock, we're coming up on the year anniversary of the program we started, our Citizen Recognition Program. And we're going to have a little reception for folks before our council meeting next Tuesday from 6 to 6:30 to recognize those who have been recognized. So just inviting anybody who might want to stop by, inviting fellow councilors here. Hopefully you will stop by, and I also wanted to thank my fellow councilors for their help on this program over the last year. I know a number of you have nominated folks, and I know a number of you have served on the committee to review nominations. So I think it's been a pretty good program. I think there's still some work to do. Again, the idea behind it is to find some people out there that are really rocking it and going above and beyond in our city, and I hope we keep doing that and finding more and more people who will. But anyway, just a quick reminder that we'll have a little recognition for them next week, and we'll keep going from there. So thank you.
Sounds good. Thank you, Councilor. Any other open discussion? Councilor Staley.
First of all, Councilor Selberg, is Jim David going to be contacting all of those people or is this something they were just going to, they all know? Okay, great. I just wanted to do a follow-up on what I had brought up a week ago about my request that we have a council budget brainstorming session. And I was going to make that formal request, but before I had a chance to do that, an invitation went out. And I think our financial budget analyst, Dave Bixler, excuse me, had a little something to do with that. So we've got that. I believe it's on, am I right, in January 30th? Dave? Yeah. Yes, January 30th, we're going to be having a brainstorming session. And my vision of this was that it was going to be council members bringing forth their ideas, their wish list of what they'd like to see in the budget on the front end, instead of trying to maybe inject something on the back end. Excuse me. little cough there. So in conjunction with this input as far as what our wish list of things we might want to see, especially now as the budget's just starting to get formulated. I had a conversation today with our very amiable, capable finance director, Sean Pritchard. And Sean, I said, Sean, I'm going to put this on Facebook, put it out there that we're doing this budget thing with the council. And then I'm going to also say to the citizens of our city, what kinds of things would you like to see in the budget? You know, we don't usually reach out like that to say, what do you want to see? So I put that out there, and Sean indicated to me in our conversation today that, lo and behold, the mayor's office is thinking of doing that as well, reaching out. We had a session on that in Pittsburgh 2 years ago, which, by the way, I'm still anxiously awaiting a report from our 4 council members who went to the National League of Cities convention. But when we went out to Pittsburgh in 2017, we had a thing called participatory budgeting. And it originated, this presentation was out of Chicago, and the council members were given $1 million apiece to take out to their districts and ask their constituents what they'd like to see done with that. And it was really cool. We're not dealing with $1 million here, of course, but it's kind of a start as far as having a little more influx and flexibility into how this budget's put together. Because as I say so frequently, it's the citizens' money and it's the citizens' business. So that's my word for the day. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor, and I'll let you know that because you brought it up and others have suggested it as well, Councillors Selberg and I did meet with staff and worked with staff to get that meeting set up. The administration was more than happy to accommodate and provide some dates that worked, and so I thank the administration for their quick response and all of you for responding to the doodle survey so we could get something scheduled right away for that, and it's just another example of us being able to work together and honor each other's requests. January 15th, we are scheduled to have our council update for those that went to the conference that has been scheduled for over a month, and so you will get your update next week. Any other open discussion? Seeing none, if there's no objections, I'd like to move item C, the Sioux Falls Thrive update, to present first. So if there's no objections, I know we reached out to Candy today to allow her to go first. So Candy, welcome.
Thank you, Council Chair Erickson and all the councilors for this opportunity to be with you. It's always a pleasure. I'm going to talk to you about Thrive, and I'm going to start with its origins, which was with Forward Sioux Falls. When we were looking at workforce in the Sioux Falls area, basically our market researchers told us that we don't really have a problem with workforce in Sioux Falls right now because we have a very young workforce. But when they looked down the road 10 to 12 years, they said, y'all need to start growing your own, and that's going to be tough because you do have a concentration of families living at lower income levels, and some of them are from backgrounds that aren't going to be able to help their kids through the school system. When we talk about Cradle to Career initiatives, which is what Thrive is, we're looking at this continuum of children passing through kindergarten all the way to post-secondary degree completion. What Thrive does is work around, not in the classroom, but in the educational ecosystem. Our kids are only in school 14% of their lives. Kids from low-income families go to school in a very mainstream area and then return to their normal neighborhoods and families. On that continuum, we know that that high school graduation is the most important thing to achieve, because if you don't have at least a high school diploma in the United States, statistically, you will use hundreds of thousands of dollars of social and governmental services over your lifetime. You will be the highest consumer of those services. The breaking points for us here are early grade reading and middle grade math. Those are two areas where if you're not reading at grade level by 3rd grade or doing math at grade level by 8th grade, the odds of your graduating high school drop statistically by 75%. So when we look at the numbers that Market Street Services looked at, these have been updated. You see good news there on the right-hand side where we have a growing number of families living households at the $100,000 level. And if you look at the other side, you see some good news too. Our extreme poverty levels by household have actually dropped. And by numbers of households, they are the same today as they were in 2008 when the recession started. And that's not bad news at all. The not so happy news is this income inequality. And when you look at the middle part of the chart and you see the drop in families earning $50,000 to $75,000, that's the middle income level. Four-person family earning around $50,000, slightly over that in Sioux Falls, is off any kind of public assistance and should be sustainable. So when we look at what happens with our kids, these are the recent figures from the school district on where our kids are concentrated, the kids that are living at low income situations. They're in 8 title schools. A title school has at least 40% of the children who are receiving or eligible to receive free and reduced price lunch. So those are 8 title schools, and you can look at the differences between those schools and our non-title schools. The one that I really want to pay attention to right now is the one right in the center, that average attendance. In addition to reading and math in those early grade levels, that is the biggest cause of dropouts, is absenteeism. So we're very concerned when we see those title schools coming in like that. You also see the other demographic differences. But about a third of our kids in our community are living at low income levels. Now, when you look at where those schools are concentrated, you're going to see that they're all north of 18th Street. There are 2 other title schools, but they are magnets. These are all neighborhood schools, and they're all north of 18th Street. So when we look at what Thrive does in working around the ecosystem, we've taken on 3 topics, and we begin by asking our council to target an obstacle to student success, again, not in the classroom, but outside the classroom. After that's targeted, we turn to Augustana Research Institute, and we ask them to do a comprehensive study. There's no sense even beginning to get groups together to problem solve and opportunity find if they're going to spend 2 years going, now, how many people moved to Sioux Falls last year, and what's the poverty rate? So we do a comprehensive study on that obstacle. We pull a cross-sector action team together. We give them professionally facilitated team leaders, and we give them Augustana Research because we expect them to base their activities on performance measurement and the true outcomes they produce. The first study that we did was on affordable housing. That was a clear issue because we have about 1,000 kids a year in our school district who are technically homeless at some point during the year, and it's hard to believe that a kid goes to school ready to learn, especially in elementary grades when they don't know where they're sleeping that night. On the basis of that, we had Augustana look at all the agencies trying to help bring people up into affordable housing and found out that we have no system. We have just a lot of good people and a lot of good agencies and a lot of great programs, but no system. So we say that we are program rich and system poor. Now, we convened a housing action team. They've been meeting for just about 1.5 years now. Again, it's cross-sector. The first thing that they came onto was the One Roof pilot project, which is still in development. That was a unique collaboration among some of the groups on that team. It began with the need to find more housing. Our housing action team isn't out there building housing or trying to advocate for affordable housing. They're trying to make the most of existing resources. And we know that there's a lot of affordable housing in Sioux Falls that's not available to people because they're privately owned and privately managed. And so that it's hard for a person who owns an affordable property to be willing to rent to a low-income family. There are only 2 reasons you can turn people down for rent or for occupancy in this country. One is a bad criminal record, and the other is bad credit. And unfortunately, most of the families we're talking about, if they're low income, they have poor credit. So there's a whole segment of our of our available housing in Sioux Falls that are not open because the owners cannot afford to take the risk. We know from the Bright Eyes study, though, that if we can put case managers with those families, we mitigate the risk. And we know from a project that we started at the Community Foundation many years ago, that if we have a damage and rent reimbursement fund in place, we can convince private market owners and property managers to rent. So this one roof pilot project is coordinated with the community outreach. They will be able to have access to those funds at the Community Foundation by working with ICAP, and they will expand their Genesis program to involve case management instead of just the support that they have. Now, that is not the only thing that that group is doing. They're also working in the areas of prevention, looking at trying to put on-site service coordinators in those projects because we know that that works, and HUD actually pays for that when it comes to senior housing. We're trying to find a way to pay for that for affordable housing projects. And they're also looking at a collaborative eviction and prevention program because, again, when you put at-risk families in housing and you finally get them placed, you really want to work against that. So their pilot is only part of their plan to help with these families and the need for affordable housing. Our second study was released earlier this year, or earlier in 2018. That was our student safety and out of school time study. People said, why are you going after that? And really because they tied right into affordable housing. We learned from developers that one of the reasons that affordable housing projects is blocked is because neighbors are saying, we do not want those kids running around loose in our neighborhood. And we knew from the parents that we interviewed from the housing project that their biggest concern is what to do, what their children are doing when they're not in school. So we released that study, and of course we find that in Sioux Falls, we have 84% of all the children in our school district who all parents in the household are in the workforce. That is almost 20% above the national average of 65%. So we have a big need for activities. Remember, those kids are only in school 14% of their lives. And when families cannot have somebody at home with them, they've got a real issue. Now, at the end of that study, we found the biggest obstacles. Of course, the first won't surprise you. It's money, because the cost of after school or activity care for a child is almost $4 an hour. And if you're low income, you cannot afford those kinds of fees. The second was the hours of access to those programs for children. We have a lot of our major employers that run 12-hour shifts. That does not, we don't have child care and after school activities that fit those hours. The second one, or the third, was the same issue that we have with most employers who are part-time employers. They don't need facilities as much as they need more staff. They could expand their child care and their after-school activity and summer programs if they could find more staff. And of course, the last one will surprise none of you. It's transportation and getting kids from where they are at school to where they need to be after school and then all the way home. So we put together that out of school time action team. They've had about 4 meetings now, and they are just reaching the stage of doing their design for their goals, as the housing team has already done. We do ask them to work. Again, our goal is not to invent more programs, it's to be able to get existing programs more effective. So we're using an approach called Appreciative Inquiry. And this is from the after out of school time, and you can see how many times the city pops up on there. The interesting thing when you bring these groups together is that they start doing novel things even without writing it down. We have the downtown library now offering to do programs at Summit Heights. We've had the Department of Labor putting an intern in with VOA, and we have 8 other groups that serve children from birth to 18 in the downtown area coming together to see whether they can improve what they're doing. So things are already happening. We released our third study, Food Security and Food Systems in Sioux Falls, on December 17th at the end of last year. We do not track food insecurity by tracks in the census, but Feeding America estimates that about 15% of the children in Sioux Falls are food insecure, and that's about 7,000 school-age children. Food insecurity means that the families are not able to eat on a normal basis. They are doing things like trading off the choice between a half gallon of milk to a gallon of gas to get to work. Or food versus, a pound of hamburger versus doing the laundry. So that's the definition of food insecurity. We entered into this in a collaboration with Feeding South Dakota. Matt Gasson came to me at the end of our first year and said, you've got to look at food. We've got to figure out what we can do better in terms of distribution. Matt, at that point, I was looking at the move that they made so that the pantry is very far north in Sioux Falls, and was really wondering how that affected his ability to serve the community. So we entered into that collaboration, and we worked with Augustana to try and identify food deserts in Sioux Falls. A food desert is defined where you have a high concentration of low-income households with low access to food, either retail and or charitable. And I've got to apologize for this because I noticed earlier that says Norton Tracts instead of Tracts. We found that there were 3 in Sioux Falls of the Froelich and Norton area. That is our highest concentration of families who are using food stamps, or SNAP as it's called now. And they also do not have easy access to either retail or charitable food support. The second one was Hayward. You're all familiar with Hayward. That's an area, again, where we have a lot of low-income families and not very many retail and charitable food assets. The third one was the surprise to most of us who saw the report, and that is that the Empire Mall is also classified as a food desert. That is because there are a lot of very affordable places to live out there, and because the buses run, there are very few many families do not have vehicles. So they have access to some retail food options, but not to charitable options. Overall, out of the 170,000 people in the city of Sioux Falls, more or less, we believe that about 63,000 are living in food deserts, even though they're only concentrated in those areas. Another thing that we do when we undertake one of these studies is to make sure the team understands where the resources are, who's providing them, and who we need to bring in when we try and do opportunity finding and problem solving. In that bottom quadrant there to the right are our public assistance and school-based food programs. They can meet about 50 to 60% of the food security needs in our community. Up above that, you see charity meals, food pantries, emergency assistance. Those 3 blocks are the gap fillers that we have in the community. Now, when we went out and we do these studies, we actually talk to consumers and ask them what they think is going on. And the most interesting thing there was that the folks that were part of the focus groups that we talked to said that they believe that Sioux Falls is a very generous city. They believe that there is food out there when they need it, but they say that it's very hard to try and pull it all together. So that was an interesting fact. The other things that we talked about with them indicated that, of course, again, transportation is an issue, especially when you're living far from retail and charitable sources. It does come up that some people who are able to be on bus routes can use buses, but are handicapped by the fact that the rule is that they must carry their packages on their lap, so that when they're bringing home stuff from the grocery, they've only got perhaps 2 bags that they can carry on the bus to get back and forth. Again, hours of operation were a problem for families. They're not always able to go to get help during normal Monday through Friday office hours. They pointed to a need for information and awareness among the population, pointed to problems with nutrition. The 2 biggest needs are trying to meet protein needs and fresh produce needs. The protein, most of them would say they can compensate. They eat a lot of eggs. Fresh produce is a little harder to get. They point out the stigma associated, and you can see that in the utilization of free and reduced price meals in the schools. You'll see that drop off significantly in middle school and in high school. Kids don't want their colleagues to know that they're using those kinds of assets. And I've had a principal tell me that they literally have to hide backpacks on Friday because the kids are embarrassed to pick up the backpack, and they put it in a secret location so the kid can pick it up and others won't see them do it. And then lastly, some of the foodstuffs that are available to them, they do not have a lot of cookware, appliances, things like that in order to meet their nutritional needs of their family. I've been telling people how they can help, and I'll let you know, and perhaps you'll spread the word to neighbors. We are just putting together that food security team. There's an application online at our website, so if you can pass that information along. I know City Health already has a person who's volunteered to serve, but if you know people who might be interested, please. The deadline is Monday for putting that team together. And the last thing I always remind people is to believe in Sioux Falls. I feel like sometimes I'm up here telling some horrible story about our city that is such a great city. And you know, you just got to believe that we can do a little bit better at managing the resources that the city, the county, all of the churches and charities are already pouring into this. And to give people a chance to come together with the right information and make things work a lot better for all of us. So I probably exceeded my time because I was due, but thank you.
You are wonderful. No problem. Thank you so much, Candy, for your presentation. We'll turn it over to the council. Any questions for Candy, statements, comments? Councilor Staley?
Candy, thank you so much. I just had wanted a few clarifications here. When you were talking, you mentioned that for this affordable housing, and I guess I wasn't aware that they're the 2 reasons that they turn them down is because you can be turned down for a criminal record and because you failed a background check?
Certain criminal records, yeah. You're going to have to, when you make your application for housing, you're going to have to go through a background check and a credit check. And under the Fair Housing Act, there's only really 2 reasons that you can say you can't rent. One is if that background check reveals some kind of criminal activity, and it's got to be bad, it can't be something minor. And the other is poor credit.
Okay, and then you explain a little more about the damage and reimbursement project. I'd never heard of that before.
So I think it was over 10 years ago, some banks in the community got together and put CRA money into a fund at the community foundation to be used to reimburse landlords who were willing to rent to high-risk clients. So the community foundation agreed to hold that fund and invest it. I signed the documents, and I thought at the time that money's going to be gone in a year, right? The money has virtually doubled, almost doubled in that time. Because if you can take a family and give them some case management assistance, they don't damage property and they don't skip rent and you don't use the fund. So ICAP is allowing community outreach to have access to $20,000 of that fund to be used for the One Roof program.
Is that money available for landlords in a multi-housing unit? Or is this for a single family?
It could be multifamily, but I would say that we're probably looking at private market landowners that have smaller units. But you could consider a fourplex or, you know.
So this, and I know we have areas that are crime-free, and then we have some, okay, and some people designated that, other people, I don't know what that's called, that when you take in, allow a person with a record to live there. But if they, what I'm interested in is cooking up that knowledge with the community right now. Just so people, I'm not sure everybody is aware that that money would be available to them, and how you would go through applying for that.
Okay, the pilot, they will have to be part of that pilot project, and if landowners, private market owners, and property managers wish to find out, they need to contact the community outreach, and they can list their properties with the community outreach. There's a 3-part agreement that gets signed among the landowner, the renter, and the community outreach. It's a contract that they all go through together. But if a landowner were interested in participating, it would be the community outreach that would be the place to start.
Okay, I have another question, but I'll wait if someone else wants to ask something.
Go ahead, you're fine, go ahead.
Okay, so then, you're talking about those food deserts, and am I right? I wrote down that you said 63,000 people in our community are living in food deserts.
That's what the estimate is. A lot of that can be because of the concentration in the different tracts.
And I heard you say that a food desert, and you got the, of course, I don't know that I'm going to publicize, even though you put it up here. I think people living in the Norton Froelich area, I know some of them up there, probably would not like that they're being classified as a food desert area, because you had Norton Froelich as one of the areas.
Sure.
Okay, so that, I think they're sometimes aware of being given a certain classification up there and kind of pigeonholed maybe into.
Classifying the area, not the people.
I understand, but some of the people up there, they think it's a very nice place to be.
I'm sure it is.
So, but nonetheless, that food desert, I had never heard that terminology before. And I'm hearing you say that is the criteria you're using for that is that they have a high usage of food stamps, was one of them.
The definition is that there's a high concentration of low-income households and little access to retail or charitable food resources, food assets.
Right. But did you say something? I thought I wrote down food stamps.
That area is the highest concentration of SNAP households in this county.
And so the challenge I'm hearing you say, and we're hearing this across the board too, is this thing with the food pantry being moved out where it is and getting people to it. Has your group looked at having some, or I don't know that I've heard of anybody in our town saying, having designated areas that would be advertised especially in these 3 desert designations, to say the bus will leave, we're going to have a special bus that's going to take you out there on these days at this time, so people would be able to have a dependable way of getting there. Has that ever been discussed?
Well, we haven't put that team together. Right now, we're still putting the team together, but Feeding South Dakota and Food to You are already doing that. And what they're doing is taking the pantry to the neighborhoods. And we expect that program will be expanded. So there's already some sense that we can take foodstuffs to the neighborhoods at times that are convenient, not the normal. Maybe on the weekend, maybe after work, when the places that run on office hours are closed down. So yes, there's tremendous stuff already going on, just as with the out-of-school time. You start talking about this, and people start coming up with wonderful ideas and innovations. So I think you'll see a lot more of that.
Thank you.
Coming months.
Councillor Kiley.
Thank you very much. And Candy, thank you very much for your efforts. I appreciate your efforts working with some of our community's most vulnerable, and that is our children. And as a career educator, I know all too well the impact that poverty has on the cognitive abilities, the abilities of individuals, our children to learn. So thank you for addressing those needs. And I know that Thrive enables student success by improving, and I'm reading from one of your bullets, by improving community services that assure their well-being and readiness to learn. And then it continues on that your focus on housing, out-of-school time, and food security, as we've been discussing. The out-of-school time is something that, quite frankly, I will be addressing next week because I did attend a session on after-school programs when we were in Los Angeles for National League of Cities. So I see the value there. Last Thursday, I attended a legislative breakfast sponsored by our Chamber of Commerce where all of our area legislators had a chance to discuss a little bit of some of their initiatives in the upcoming legislative session. A number of them talked about addressing mental health issues in our K-12. And again, as a career educator, I certainly know, and I've been retired for a number of years now, so I can only imagine that the number of mental health issues has only increased since my retirement. And I also understand that the impact that it has on that child's ability to learn and to be successful. And if the earlier we address it, number one, the earlier we can identify it. And we're in a key area there where we're in K-12 because we have resources available that we don't have available once they become adults. But we have the classroom teacher, we have school counselors, we have building principals that can all help to identify and refer these individuals to the resources that they are in need of. And especially when we're working and focusing on individuals that have come from low economic backgrounds, the likelihood of them having insurance to cover services for mental health related issues is probably not very strong. So what is Thrive doing in this area? And well, I'll leave it at that.
Well, funny you should ask, because mental health was our next targeted study with Augustana. But because of the state taking on this big study, my board has decided we need to wait until we see that evolve before we start doing a study here in Sioux Falls. That's where it stands today. That was a December decision. But we are actually meeting with people who want to take another look at that on Friday. So it was the next targeted study. What I can tell you right now is it's postponed, but I don't know for how long.
Well, that's good to hear, because I would encourage you to potentially strongly consider adding that to housing and the out-of-school time and food security as maybe a fourth area to concentrate on. So
I will remember to share that with the group on Friday. And no, we know the behavior issues in our school district are just skyrocketing. And I don't know the number from this year, but Doug Morrison last year said there are 125 staff now doing nothing but dealing with behavior.
yeah.
And we know that that's tracing back to some unfortunate health issues.
And unfortunately, not only does it impact their ability to learn, but it also impacts the ability for others around them to learn, because it requires so much of the classroom's teachers' focus. So thank you for looking into that further.
I will carry your knowledge forward. Thank you.
Some of our state legislators may be able to assist in that area too, because again, they identified that as goals of theirs. So thank you, Candy.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Starr?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for this update. It was pretty enlightening. Can we still go back to your AV? Did we lose your slides? Can I ask a couple of questions based on the slide, or can you pull that back up again? Or
yeah. What do you need?
Slide 4 to start with, if we can get there.
4?
Yes, please.
Which is this one?
A couple more. I'm sorry, mine are numbered. That's it's the family one with education. There we go. One of the things when you talked about kindergarten readiness,
Yes.
Is one of the things, did you look at some of that being ready for kindergarten type of things with the lacking in services that, we have waiting lists for Head Start. We have hundreds of kids who qualify for Head Start in the community, but we don't have the funding to get them that early childhood. We don't, that readiness to start. And I know we've had other groups that have started and are trying to work on some of those things, but that seemed like that's one area where we really lack in Sioux Falls and South Dakota.
It is. And South Dakota is one of 6 states that doesn't provide any funding at all for those preschool programs, except what we pass through from Head Start. Yes, and the big mover and shaker in our community on that right now is the Hope Coalition. And they've been doing private charitable fundraising. And I believe the last time I was visiting with them, they had put another 85 children into preschool, and that we really should invite them in. The biggest obstacle right now is, again, back to transportation. They convinced churches with existing preschools to reduce tuition for the children. Unfortunately, those churches are on the south side of town, and the kids that need the help are on the north side of town. So,
would you mind flipping one? My next question has to do with the next chart, because this is scary to me.
Yeah.
We talk about housing, we talk about food, we talk about all the other things, but we've eliminated the middle class in our community. I mean, when you look at what the numbers are showing, I mean, we subsidize with tax incentives for entry-level jobs, retail service industry. That's all on the bottom side of that chart. And we continue as government agencies, whether it's state, county, local, federal, to bring jobs to town that are in that categories rather than on the high end of it. And that middle is where you can afford to have a house. You can afford to pay for transportation. You can afford to raise your family and have the childcare that you need. So we're subsidizing twice on the low end, because we call it economic development when we give a TIF to retail or to entry-level jobs or service industry jobs, which are all good jobs and hardworking people. I just have a hard time telling people that they're in poverty when they work 60 hours a week and can't afford a place to live.
Yeah, it is.
And they make
tough.
$35,000 a year.
Yeah, it really is tough. But, Sioux Falls is very much like our country right now. And part of it is just the big economic or the job transition that's going in our country now, too, where, when I moved to Sioux Falls years ago, I mean, people who worked for John Morrell had houses with RV parked out in front. And our wages just for those jobs have really disappeared. So Sioux Falls isn't too different from the rest of the country. There really is increasing income inequality, and tough to find the jobs that you can move into that actually provide a middle-class living.
And that's where I'm struggling with looking at this chart, and I know it's the rest of the nation, but I look at some of the policies we do, the rest of government entities in our state, and we're not doing what we need to be doing to build that middle class. If we're going to incentivize jobs and wages, it seems like finding jobs that people can, getting them the training that they need to fill that middle out again like it should be. That's where we're missing. We can try to subsidize housing all we want. We can try to subsidize transportation and try to fix these things. But until we get people earning an adequate income to support their family, we're just taking money from the same people and giving it to them to support their housing. And whether we tax their food or whether we, where we do it, until we solve this part, it's going to be really difficult to do the other things that go with that.
I can't disagree with you.
Thank you.
Councilor Selberg.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Candy, for for laying this out today. I think a couple things came to mind watching this. I mean, I just really appreciate your efforts and your organization's efforts and always kind of your goals and your optimism. And I mean, I do believe that Sioux Falls is a great city and a generous city. I think we had some really nice conversations. It was nice of you to come and visit with us as an HAB board. I know as we're kind of trying to charter our path forward and to get your input kind of too on as you said, I mean, we're really program rich in this city. We don't need more programs. We just need existing programs to be more effective. And I thought the conversations and input you had as we were as we're still working on our goals and where we're going to go is really effective. So I really do appreciate that. So I guess my question might be a little bit off the beaten path a little from what you talked about today. But I mean, when you talk about your organization, and I'm always just so intrigued every time I read more about it or hear more about it, but let's say there's people that want to become involved with Thrive, or they want to volunteer more, they want to become a part of something. Where do they go first of all if they want to volunteer, say I want to do something about this? And what's the makeup of the board for Thrive? How are people nominated? How long are the terms? How do they serve?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, first of all, opportunities to volunteer are on the website. And right now, we're really trying to attract people who want to work on food security and food access. So those are posted on the website. We also do training. Probably the next training will be in August, where people can come in and actually learn 3 days worth of Thrive's approach to problem solving and community opportunity finding. And then those people actually volunteer for various projects. For example, right now they're volunteering for the homeless count that we moved over to Augustana. So Augie calls Thrive and says, can you send some volunteers over for that? So that's how you do it. Get to the website, give me a call, let me talk to the service group. We'll find a way for you to help. And then you were asking about the board. Thrive was actually founded, it was a recommendation from Forward Sioux Falls. It was founded by the Chamber, Development Foundation, Community Foundation, and United Way, and they actually appoint our board of directors. And it's a 9-member board of directors. Lisa Beacom is the chair right now, Fred Slenica is vice chair, Beth Fuller Jensen is secretary, Bill Baker is the treasurer, and there are 5 others. Great. Then we have also a council, and those are 15 members, 15 representatives of agencies in Sioux Falls pouring the most resources into trying to grapple with some of these root causes of poverty. So the city actually has 2 representatives on that council. One is Mike Cooper, and the other is Jill Franken. Okay. United Way has 2 representatives, again, because of the role you play in investing in these resources. And there's one more with 2. The school district. School district has 2 representatives. And the others are Forward Sioux Falls, VOA Dakotas, ICAP, Lutheran Social Services. I'm going to leave somebody out. But the agencies that are really boots on the ground.
Great. Okay, very interesting. Well, hopefully those who are out there listening will take a look at your site and get involved and help that way. So thanks again for the presentation.
Love to make new friends.
Yep, thank you.
Thank you, Candy. Any other comments or questions? Councilor Brecky?
Janet.
Thank you for the presentation. What year was it that this all got started?
We're 2 years old.
Okay. I was on that chamber group, when we were kickstarting you, and I was so excited about it at the time. And so to hear all of this, how far you've come and with the research and the data. And I remember at the time you saying I was interested in slide 11. That's the one that shows the chaos of all the systems. You at that time predicted that that's what it would show. So I think they're all out there. I just don't think there's an umbrella organization to organize them. So just a little follow-up to that. So knowing that, now that you've, and again, that's the slide 11, knowing that what you've got, and maybe you said it when you spoke, in your presentation, but, how are you trying to create that umbrella, or are you, how are you trying to deal with that issue? Because it's good news and bad news, well, mostly good news.
For each one of the issues, it will be different. In fact, after we call this the plate of spaghetti slide. And when Augie walked into my office, at first I said, I can't do a thing with this, get it out of here. And then I realized it might be the most valuable thing they had done for me. But the plate of, I won't let them use this tool anymore, but it will look different for each of the topics or obstacles that we identify. And the coalitions that come together stem from what comes out of those action teams. Now, one of the other goals, there's about 5 goals that the housing folks are working on, and the other is to actually be able to map a navigation system. And it's a little scary. We've even talked about finding an engineer because it really is that complicated.
But I like the answer. I do, because it's just a matter of, divide and conquer, trying to find those that can focus on those different issues and then channel that stuff in a
And it's challenging for the
organized direction.
agencies because we're not funding them. They have to
Yeah.
find time to send staff and give up that staff time in order to participate. But, I can't help it. They reinforce my belief that it's doable. If any city can do it, it's Sioux Falls. It's just, we've got the right people, we've got the right stuff.
Yeah. And then I was kind of traumatized by slide number 5, the one on that, shows the, I didn't want to believe it, but I knew it. Just in coming back to the city 14 years later after having been here, this loss of the middle class. I mean, again, we're talking about it at a national level. I mean, we know it's happening. But we have been good at Sioux Falls in the past of seeing national trends and reacting to them in a way, because we get along, we work together, and we always have been in Sioux Falls and in the state. Sometimes we've been able to make a difference. But this is an issue, for me, that I didn't want to believe it, until I saw the slide. I mean, I knew it, though. I will tell you, I knew it because of the campaigning. When I was out campaigning in the campaign cycle, I had a feeling that I was coming back into a different Sioux Falls than I left 14 years ago. In just 14 years, this is what's happened. And I think it's huge. And the council's heard me say this a number of times, and I'm going to say it again. The council needs to get involved in a long-range strategic planning process. And we need to start articulating our goals and then seeing to it that the funding is there to support those things that really matter and are really important. In this area, do you have any suggestions, thoughts, guidelines, if we were to adopt something like this as a goal, as to how, how you just tapping into your knowledge, how would you suggest we attack this problem from the city's perspective? How do you see us a player in this?
Wow, you two were really putting me
You
on
didn't
the
think
spot.
I'd make it easy, did you?
Honestly, I'm going to tell you, I really have not given much thought to that. And, I'll tell you something, though. If you want to, Thrive will volunteer to facilitate a little mini think tank for you. You tell me who you want in the room, and Thrive will come in and use our little magic Thrive toolbox and see if we can come up with some answers for you. How's that?
And maybe that's the answer I wanted. Maybe what I was doing was identifying that this is something that's not being done, that we maybe should and could be doing.
If y'all
and I would
decide you
totally
want to
appreciate
tackle
that.
something like that, we will support you.
If I can convince the council to do that, we'll be in touch.
Okay.
Thanks, Candy. Any other questions? Thank you for your time. I appreciate it. Thanks for being available. Counselors, feel free to reach out to Candy and her team with any additional follow-up questions that you have. Thanks for what you're doing in our community. Our next item we will talk about is property tax reduction programs by Dustin Powers. And I think you have some others here as well. Thank you, Dustin, for being here.
Good afternoon, Dustin Powers with the Planning and Development Services Department. Today I'm here to discuss with you our 3 property tax reduction programs in the city of Sioux Falls. Today's purpose for bringing these programs forward was to provide you an overview of the existing programs, including information on the application process, eligibility, and just the history of how these programs have been utilized over the last several years. Internally, we have begun to look at some of these programs and have had some initial discussions on looking at some proposed changes to these programs. And so, again, we wanted to provide you some background on the programs just to kind of kick off that process. Ultimately, we would review some of these programs with some of our partner organizations and other stakeholders, and then we would like to bring forward some recommendations that we would be brought forth in front of the council for consideration. So to start with our reduced property taxation, property tax reduction is a very important tool at the City of Sioux Falls. It is one of the few programs that the city has to offer as an incentive to attract desired development or redevelopment to specified areas, desired industries or businesses to the City of Sioux Falls, ultimately resulting in jobs and an increase in tax base for the city. Authority is granted by South Dakota Codified Law 10-6, and over the years, the city has adopted those three programs, one being industrial, one associated with the downtown area, and another neighborhood program, and we'll get into each of those programs throughout the slides here. So how do you receive reduced taxation, property taxation? Any person desiring to claim reduced taxation on a new construction or redevelopment or addition to a property can file an application with the Planning and Development Services Department on or before October 1st of the year in which the project's completed. Typically, we receive these applications then throughout the year as projects are completed or as we talk with individuals that are looking at utilizing the program. That varies for each of the programs. Sometimes we have a lot of conversation up front, and other times we have maybe limited conversations with the applicants because they're developers in town that are aware of the programs and know how to file the applications and what the requirements are for each of those programs. Following the October 1st deadline, the city will begin to review those applications based on the use of and the areas in which those projects are and which program they fit under. And then following around November 1st, the county certifies valuations for the following year. And so what we do is each of these programs have a valuation minimum that must be met with the project. And so we have to review what the new valuation of those projects will be once they're completed with the county to make sure that they're eligible and meet the requirements of the programs. So what does the reduced property taxation provide? Projects that receive approval for property tax reduction will see the following formula on their taxable value for the first 5 years of taxes for their project. These programs are only for the added improvements to any property. So if you have an existing, let's say we have an existing warehouse building or manufacturing facility and they're adding an addition to, only the added improvements and the added valuation is subject to the program. Any existing valuation and taxes would still be paid in full for those properties. As you can see on the screen, so in year one following construction, they would have no taxable value for that first year, which means that they pay no taxes, ultimately resulting in 100% savings for their taxes for year one. In year two, they'll pay 20% of the valuation, ultimately an 80% savings. Year three, 40%. Year four, 60, 80. And then by year six, they're back up to 100% of the valuation of the project and ultimately paying full property taxes at that point in time. Ultimately, if you look at that in a holistic view, over the 5-year program, they approximately save 60% of the taxes through that 5 years. And so that's looking at it on a whole level. One thing I did want to mention, a program that we talk a lot about is tax increment financing. And so I wanted to briefly just explain the difference between this program and tax increment financing. With TIFs, ultimately, the property is valued at its full assessed value, and the developer pays the full taxes as they normally would, and then they get those funds reimbursed to them through our TIF agreements. Where this is a reduced valuation, so the valuation of the property is reduced, they pay less in taxes, and ultimately that's their savings associated with that. So that's a little bit of the difference in terms of with TIF, they're paying full taxes, they're just getting it reimbursed to them. In the case of reduced property taxation, they're just paying less taxes in as how they receive their savings. So let's start with our industrial program. One of the main reasons the we have our industrial program is, again, to attract targeted industries that would bring jobs to Sioux Falls. This program is one of our more utilized programs, and we work concurrently with our partner organization, the Sioux Falls Development Foundation, as well as the Governor's Office of Economic Development. There are two entities that look at bringing business and new businesses and new jobs to Sioux Falls. And ultimately, with this being the industrial program, a lot of what they're trying to attract to Sioux Falls is what falls under this program. And so this is a program that when they're having site selectors come to town and say that they're looking for specific sites for businesses, this is a program that we can share and offer as part of an incentive to draw that business to the city of Sioux Falls. I won't go through all of the uses that are on the screen and the next screen, but the ordinance outlines a number of uses that have been supported over the years. And again, this list for this program has been amended throughout the years, but it also allows the flexibility as it is not, as if you read the first sentence there, it's not limited to the following uses. So again, we're looking at industrial structures with industrial uses is ultimately the goal and the uses associated with this program. And again, here's a little bit of continuation of what those other uses are listed in the ordinance itself. Now with this program, all new qualifying structures or additions or renovations have to meet a minimum threshold of added value of $300,000 to their taxable value. And so again, $300,000 is been the threshold that the city of Sioux Falls has set. According to South Dakota codified law, the threshold is $30,000 for the state. So again, you have to think about that in terms of where the city of Sioux Falls compared to other rural counties and jurisdictions that utilize these programs. But we have a much higher threshold than most of the state. We wanted to provide an example of for each of the programs of projects that have received reduced taxation as part of those programs. So for the industrial one, we are providing the example of Wind Chill up in Foundation Park. If you look at the bottom there, the total added valuation for this first phase of the project was $24.5 million. And over the 5-year program, they'll save approximately $1.4 million in savings. When you look at the chart in the green, as you can see in year one, the valuation that they'll have on year one of that project is $0. Thus, they pay in $0 in taxes, and they have an ultimate savings of $491,000 for that year one, which is 100% savings. Year two, you start to see that they are valued at 20% of that $24 million. They pay 20% essentially of the taxes, and they still have an 80% savings. And you can run down the list there of how that breakout just works throughout the years for that project. This is also a Wind Chill, also had a second phase of the project that qualifies when they did an addition, and that's an additional $15 million in added valuation for that project that ultimately will result in another $900,000 in savings. Moving on to our downtown program. The downtown program is a bit simplified in terms of uses compared to the industrial program. It just lists that all new industrial or commercial structures or additions to existing or renovations to existing structures that have an added valuation of $50,000 or more are eligible. So really the only things that are non-eligible in terms of the downtown area would be residential. Now if commercial residential is defined as 4 or more units, and that's a definition that we'll use in our neighborhood program too. So if there was a 4-plex or larger that's rented units, then that could qualify under this program and be considered commercial property. But anything under 3 units or single family housing would not qualify in this program. Just to kind of, again, this is a program that was adopted to assist with really the redevelopment of downtown. This was a program that was created back in, I believe it was adopted in the late 80s. And again, at that time, downtown wasn't developing and thriving as it is today, and definitely has been a benefit to that area. The downtown area, again, just for clarification, is the boundaries are 14th Street on the south side, Falls Park Drive on the north, Minnesota on the west, and then Weber and Franklin with a little jog over on the east side as well. You know, this is a program, just with that brief description up there, that would be a good example of some of the things that we want to look into when we're talking about changes to these ordinances. It lists all new industrial structures. Industrial structures are not something that we're really desiring to build in our downtown area. Most of our current zoning district doesn't allow those types of uses, as well as, you know, our planning efforts with the 2025 downtown plan and other things that we have tried to do over the years has really tried to create that more as a central business district and move away from the industrial uses in downtown. So again, that's just a simple example of some of the things that we would be looking at in terms of these ordinances moving forward. An example of a downtown program would be the Jones 421 Lofts. This is an interesting one and also shows some of the complexity of the downtown program due to the mix of uses throughout downtown. So when you look at this building, or if you've been in the building, the first floor is retail commercial use, with the remaining 3 floors above being single-family condos. And so single-family condos do not qualify under this program. However, the commercial portion does, because this property, the commercial property is separated out, condoed out, separate from the single family. The program is only eligible for that first level and the evaluation of that first level. So when we look at the total added valuation for this project being $834,000, that's only the commercial level that we're talking about. We're not talking about the entire project. The entire project itself is valued at a much higher rate, but because of the single family uses, we're only being able to qualify the bottom floor. And so you can see that over the 5 years, they'll receive approximately $50,000 in savings. And again, if you look at the chart there, you can just see how that breakout works out over the 5-year period. Our last program is our neighborhood program. And with this, you know, this program was really created to help revitalize and redevelop some of the identified neighborhoods within the core of the city of Sioux Falls, and we'll show those here in a minute. But a couple definitions, again, that with this program we should look at. The first being commercial structure. So in the downtown program, we also have commercial structure, but it's much more broad in terms of what commercial structure entails. In this neighborhood program, we really identified when this was adopted what types of uses we were considering commercial and what types of uses that we wanted to see in these neighborhood developments. And so you can go through the list there to see that we wanted to see retail and trade services without, you know, any adult use or any alcohol beverage sales on site or off site sale. But then looking at office, boarding house, daycare center as kind of eligible uses in these areas. And then again, the commercial residential structure comes up as well. So again, commercial residential is 4 or more dwelling units, excluding group homes. So again, with this, we have 2 separate areas that we're going to talk about. So new commercial residential structures are going to be allowed under certain neighborhoods, and then our commercial structures are going to be allowed in just one neighborhood associated that we've identified with these programs. And again, this is how these programs exist today. And then the minimum valuation increase for this this program is $30,000. So we have to see a $30,000 increase in valuation for this program to be applicable for these projects. So Exhibit A is 7 of the core neighborhoods identified around downtown. You can see Whittier, Beetle, All Saints, Folsom's Addition, which is Pettigrew, West 12th Street, Axtell, and North End are how the neighborhoods were identified when this was adopted. And these 7 neighborhoods, commercial residential structures qualify. So any 4 or more unit apartment complex is what would qualify in these 7 neighborhoods, as long as the valuation was $30,000 or more. Now Exhibit B highlights Folsom's Addition, which is the Pettigrew neighborhood. And ultimately, this neighborhood also allows the program to be implemented with commercial structures. And ultimately, when this program was brought forward, this neighborhood specifically was identified as one that had more capacity with commercial use along because of the main stretches of 10th and 11th Street that run through here. Also, I believe at the time, a lot of the property along those stretches of roadway were also zoned commercial, and many of them still are today. And ultimately, it was decided that we wanted to provide assistance if commercial was to happen within the Pettigrew neighborhood. An example of the neighborhood program was the Sioux Empire housing project. This would be if you were heading west on 10th Street out of downtown and you get to the bend of the road. There's five kind of townhomes there right now, and as shown on the screen. But ultimately, this was a project that was built, and these units were rented for the first 5 years. So they were 5 or 4 more units. They were considered a commercial residential structure that received the benefit of the program. And then ultimately, later on, they decided to sell the units as single-family housing. But again, $412,000 in added valuation, a savings of approximately $25,000. And as you can see, again, the breakout there on the screen with the year-to-year comparison. There was also an additional attachment that I provided you and was provided online that illustrates all of the approved projects or properties within the last 10 years. So from 2008 and 2018. I'm not going to go through those today, but if you have any questions on any of those in the future, just let me know. But what I wanted to do was really just kind of summarize what that list said. As you can see, the most utilized program has been our industrial program. And again, I think a lot of that has to do with our relationship with the Sioux Falls Development Foundation and Governor's Office of Economic Development, and using this program to really draw and attract business and new businesses to Sioux Falls, as well as expansion of existing businesses here in our industrial parks. Our downtown program has obviously been utilized more in recent years as downtown development has been more prosperous in recent years. And then our neighborhood program has been one that's hasn't been utilized as much, but it still had an added benefit to the projects that took advantage of it. So these programs have been successful in supporting over 65 projects that have resulted in over $200 million in valuation added to the Sioux Falls tax base over the last 10 years. And while these projects have been successful, we wanted to take a little bit of a step back and start to look at these programs again, the allowable uses and the criteria to make sure that they're reflective of what the city's goals and objectives are now. Again, the residential or the neighborhood program is our newest program, and that was adopted back in 2007. And so these programs have been around for quite a while, with the other two being adopted in the late 80s. And so really just wanting to look at them and see what we can do to improve them to make them more valuable to the city and future projects. So what are we going to do? To begin reviewing these programs, we have identified some areas that we wanted to look at. First, we wanted to meet with our stakeholders and some of our partner organizations. We actually have had a brief meeting already with the Sioux Falls Development Foundation specific to the industrial program, as that's one that has a major effect in some of the things that they work on. But we'll want to reach out to other partner organizations that have some interest or utilization of our other programs as well. So when we reach out to them, we want to understand, what each program is designed to do, what are we trying to achieve with each program. But by understanding what we're trying to achieve and what the desired outcome is, that'll help us formulate what we want to see as criteria for these programs moving forward. We want to review the requirements for projects and what they should do to receive an incentive. Obviously, right now, we're really reviewing location, use, and valuation are the only three things that we're reviewing. But do we want to start to look at more things? Job creation. What is this company or what is this project going to bring to Sioux Falls? What the types of jobs are? Increase in tax base. In other states and other cities. programs like this, could have a variety of things, looking at everything from jobs that have 401ks and things like that as a requirement to receive an incentive like this. And so again, that would be different for each program depending on what we're trying to achieve with each program, but just food for thought as we start to review these programs. And then again, just reviewing our process for administering them. And obviously that'll be driven by what types of things are we requiring as part of requirements for these programs. Right now, with only needing to review use and location and valuation, the application process and review process is fairly simplified. But if we want to start to see some additional things, we'll have to evaluate what that review and application process looks like in the future. One thought is in some of these, if we're wanting to see numbers of jobs or numbers of other things that they're going to bring to the community, that review process would probably happen earlier than what it currently does today. So our goal would be to work through this process that's kind of outlined on the screen, talk with our partner organizations and other stakeholders. Ultimately, we would like to bring those recommendations forward to the fiscal committee for review. And work through that committee process, and then ultimately following that we could bring recommendations back to the full city council for your guys' input. But again, today we wanted to share really kind of a summary and an overview of the existing programs, how they are, and then as we start to review them and get more into recommendations, will be brought back in front of the committee process as well as city council. So with that, I can answer any questions that you have on the programs.
Thank you, Dustin, for your presentation. I appreciate all the work that you put into this and providing this for us. Any questions from the council? Councilor Neitzer.
Yeah, this was really good. We don't have a lot of tools in the toolbox. It's interesting to learn about one that we do have. Is there a limit to the amount that you can allow for a specific project or a number of projects in a year?
No, we don't have any limit identified in ordinance. So as long as they meet the minimum qualifications identified in ordinance, they could apply for multiple projects, like if they own multiple properties, or in the instance of like Windshill, they obviously had a phase 1 and a phase 2, so they do have 2 applications in, and ultimately those were actually on separate properties, even though they're kind of one building, and so that there's no limit to the amount, I guess, that they can get.
So, I mean, if they meet the criteria, do you grant all of them, or do you just turn some away, or?
Yeah, ultimately, if we review the uses and the valuation and they currently meet those, they would qualify under any of the programs. So there's not really a turning away. It's just as long as they meet that. And you could make the project or the process, we could look at making the process a little bit different in terms of, some communities have a very subjective approach to it, and it's very much, based on what we want, at that given time. And I don't know if we want to get completely there, but there is opportunities to, where we could review or limit probably these, but we would have to, write those restrictions probably in the ordinance, because right now they're not identified.
What some other areas do, and we should think about it, and a little food for thought as you're looking at this, is giving preferential treatment, or maybe saying you have to, if you're going to do a commercial residential structure, a multifamily, you've got to dedicate so much. It's got to be within a certain AMI or affordable component for 20 or 30 years, that if you're going to do a $1,500 a month market rate apartment, it's not going to qualify. Yeah. Just as a food for thought.
One thing I would note about our program that's different than most of the programs across the state, because obviously this is allowed by South Dakota codified law. Most of the rural counties that have, so either the county can adopt this or the municipality can adopt a program. And ultimately in most of the rural areas, the counties have adopted the programs, and then some of the cities have adopted their own. And ultimately when you adopt your own, you're just almost, I would say that probably, I'm not positive on this, but probably 99% of them don't have any additional requirements. Like when we've raised our valuation from 30 to 300,000, most of them just meet the minimum standards. I would also say that we're probably one of the only communities that actually require an application process. And so what happens in those communities or those counties is ultimately if a project comes in that meets those minimum requirements, they just automatically get it. And so what we've tried to do and when we adopted these programs was to create the application process so that it's just not quite that, you know, giveaway, but you still have to kind of go through a formal review process. And again, you know, that process is what we're going to look into and the type of criteria that we look at as well.
And final question, do you know if you've had any cases where this was really kind of the make or break for a project? Or it was a huge deal that won something?
I would say I don't know if this is the only program in terms of it was a make or break for an individual project, but I would say like when we have companies that come into Sioux Falls that are working with our Sioux Falls Development Foundation, this is maybe one of the tools that is used to make sure that they come to Sioux Falls. So this may be what the city can offer to bringing that company, but the Development Foundation may be able to sell them land at a discounted rate, then that's their contribution. And the state has other programs in terms of, you know, if they bring a number of jobs, they can help with workforce development or they can help with providing them moving costs, things like that. So each entity, we kind of work together on those to bring a package, I guess, forward. And I would say that, you know, in many cases, this has been a, you know, a pretty influential one in terms of what the city can offer. And again, with it being one of our only carrots, I guess, that we have, you know, it is something that's definitely helped with some of those. I'd say there's others that obviously have, you know, ones that have, you know, we don't receive a lot of conversations about, and they are aware of the program and they submit an application, you know, that wasn't part of their decision making in terms of the project going forward, but, you know, it may have made it easier for them, so.
Okay, thanks.
Counselor Starr.
Yes, thank you. Just a quick question. So when the property tax rebate is part of this program, is it just the city's portion, or is it also the county and the school district's portion of their taxes, or
So the
you know,
whole
what that makes up?
valuation is just lowered, so they just pay, essentially they're just paying in less taxes, but it's still split evenly as it would be with any other tax.
Right, the 60-30.
Yeah,
Gotcha.
same percentage breakup.
I was trying to think if I think Councilor Neitzer did a nice job of covering most of what I had. Give me an idea, are we then at a point where we're just kind of holding on, or we're reviewing? What do you see in 2019 happening? Are there applications filed?
There are a few applications that we already do have for projects that are going to occur in 2019. And those are, again, like I said, those come in throughout the year. Those are ones that we met with. Those are ones that actually came in, I think, through either GoEd or the Development Foundation of projects that they were working with. And obviously, you know, we offered this as kind of that incentive early on. And so that's why those are ones that we already have filed. You know, a lot of times people wait until October 1st or right around there. You know, one of the other things confusing with that deadline is it says October 1st of the year completed. Well, you could complete a project after October 1st. And so we have been a little, you know, flexible with that, but it's really dependent, really what year we implement is based on more what the county assessment is, because if they haven't completed the project until after October 1st, the county's likely only partially valued it or not valued it at all. And so we would just hold it until the next year. And so sometimes we have applications that come a year round kind of deal in terms of that. But ultimately, you know, really, I think our goal with these changes would be to, like I said, we've already met with the Development Foundation once on kind of the industrial program, and I think we'll, you know, over the next several weeks want to meet with some of the other stakeholders, but ultimately, you know, this spring still try to bring back some recommendations or ideas to the fiscal committee that could be reviewed through that committee process, and ultimately, you know, in front of council after that. So
Perfect, thank you.
Counselor Kiley.
Thank you. Dustin, looking at your summary of the 2018 property tax reductions and the breakdown by program, I noticed, of course, neighborhood programs just a fraction of what the others would be, and it's probably unfair to judge that based on dollar amount, because obviously a project in a neighborhood is going to vary greatly from an industrial program. But looking at just the number of properties, we had 3 properties during that time span. What are the challenges that you face in terms of increasing that number? And how has this been used to meet affordable housing, or how could it be used to meet our affordable housing needs, as that's an important component in the workforce development too. But anyway, what are the challenges that you face in that area, that particular program?
I think one of the reasons, and maybe I'll answer your question with a different answer, but one of the reasons the industrial program has been successful is because of the relationship that the Development Foundation and the knowledge that they have about the program and how it's utilized. I would say that the neighborhood program hasn't been something that's been utilized and maybe not shared with some of our partner organizations that work in the affordable housing or accessible housing world. And so I think just education to them and getting their input on what we can do to improve this program is something that we can do to help make it utilized and help with that accessible housing issue that we have. I think another thing is that we, again, those areas, it's hard, I guess, to look at kind of when development occurs in some of those neighborhoods too, because redevelopment and at a neighborhood setting or level is not as common or doesn't happen as much as, when we're talking about an industrial park on the edge of town where there's available land. And so there's obviously a larger amount of cost associated with that. And so I think that's, one thing that these programs don't address is single family housing. And if, I haven't done the full review on that, but that's something that is allowed under state law as long as it's considered a redevelopment neighborhood. And so I need to do some research on what that would pertain to. But, obviously we'd have to make, what's the criteria? I mean, obviously we don't want everyone in Sioux Falls to receive property tax reduction for single family housing. And so again, is that even a step that we want to take? Mm-hmm. Maybe we should still focus on that commercial residential portion, but make it more enticing to the individuals that are doing those affordable housing projects to make it more viable for them. So again, one thing that we could do, again, just spitballing some thoughts here, but the program by state law is allowed to be 5 years complete reduction. So we could have 5 years of 100% reduction for these programs. That's not what's adopted. We would have to adopt that, but I would say most cities and most programs across the state are more that stepped approach like we have, but there are some that if it's a desired use that we really want to address, we could look at doing 100% for certain things. So if we wanted to really address accessible housing in these neighborhoods, is that enough? And again, we'd have to talk to some of those developers and some of those organizations. Is getting from 60% savings to 100% savings for 5 years, is that enough to push the needle to make this work better? Okay. And I don't know the answer to that right now, but again.
And also, if I may, Madam Chair, in addition to be a potential tool for that could be used to assist with accessible housing and affordable housing, could be used to battle neighborhood blight, especially in our central core areas, because you've identified the central core areas where the programs would qualify. And so that it's a tool that could maybe be used to keep our central core of the city vibrant as well too. So, correct. Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, so Dustin, first of all, what's the contact number if somebody wants more information, and who is the contact person?
I would be the contact person.
Are you a department head?
No.
So if I wanted to call for some more information, am I going to be able to talk to you, or who do I talk to?
I would say that these programs, you would talk to me.
Thank you. Okay, what's your phone number?
367-8897.
911? Okay. 367.
8897.
So why doesn't this program, these properties have the same scrutiny by the council that a TIF does?
You know, I think, you know, with this program, this is a program that was intended, again, depending on which program we're talking about, to attract jobs or businesses to Sioux Falls, such as the industrial program, or to help revitalize and redevelop specific areas of town, such as the neighborhood and the downtown program. And again, this is, you know, what we're following is codified law. TIF, I would say, is different in terms of the types of scrutinizing, I guess, more of what the funds are going to be used for, where this is more of a, you know, again, a reduced savings for the project. So again, I would say that it's just really the intention of the programs to be totally different. You know, the reason for the programs is different, you know, in terms of why we see these programs the way we do. So again, this is more of an administrative process based on codified law. Yes, they receive a reduce in taxation and they pay it, but again, we're formulating the criteria and then we're in ordinance that they're required to. So really, you know, all we do have though right now is use and valuation are the criteria. With that criteria, it could be more. With TIF, again, those are more on a case-by-case basis based on, you know, typically extraordinary costs associated with redevelopment of a certain area.
So the council doesn't have to be aware of these transactions at all? We're not approving these.
So what the council has required by ordinance, and I'd say probably hasn't been accomplished over previous years, but we're required to bring to you the yearly approvals every year. I think by ordinance it's stated by July or something of every year, we're supposed to bring you a report of which properties were approved.
Okay, because
So
I
you see
don't
the 10-year
remember hearing about this in the
so
past.
you see the 10-year report. So going forward, we will continue to bring the next year's applications that were approved. And again, the council adopted the ordinance and the criteria. So, you know, we feel we have the ability to approve them as we've been granted authority. And then again, we would just come and bring you an update of which ones that have been approved throughout the year.
So you're saying you're going to be more informational with this moving forward? Is
Yeah, we
that
can
what you're
bring
saying? You're
forward,
going to
again-
let us know what you're doing, even though we don't have any authority over approving these
Well, your authority's is the ordinances that have been adopted. So, I mean, again, that's what we're trying to address is the ordinances that have been adopted. And so if you have comments on them when we bring forward changes or amendments, you know, that would be the time to get those changes adopted. And then that would be our authority again, moving forward on how we approve these. And then when we bring them forward to you would be we're just required to bring that report forward, summarizing basically what you have in your hand, what we've approved over the years.
I'm hearing you say, because one of the questions I had is who decides who the benefactor is of this wonderful program? And correct me if I'm wrong, but the purpose of this is to encourage all these three different categories to do some kind of rehab, renovation, expansion. Is that right?
The program is meant to bring projects to Sioux Falls that would increase the tax base and ultimately redevelop defined areas or bring in targeted businesses and jobs to Sioux Falls.
And so the part of it that I thought was exciting is this part, the last part you mentioned, is the part that the neighborhood aspect of, I believe you said fourplexes was the minimum, and then you're inferring that we could broaden this to single-family homes. I think that's exciting. And I also had a question I was going to say to you, Dustin, who decides who the benefactors are of this? But you did state that it's pretty much you come and ask and we give.
The property owners who pay the taxes are the benefactor of the program. Now, I want to put a caveat by the single-family comment and that we still need to review that.
No, I get that. I know, I'm excited about that. I understand that's not in policy yet. But you made it sound, when I was listening, is that pretty much people who are applying for this are being approved.
Not everyone's approved, no.
Okay.
We do have applications that we have turned down based on the use didn't qualify or the valuation came in under the threshold. And typically, you know, we have a couple of those on a yearly basis. Most cases, we have conversations with those individuals before they apply, and we can let them know that they don't qualify. But some, like I said, don't necessarily call us. They just know about the programs and they send an application in.
Right.
And we do, once we review them, we do.
And this is interesting to see who the recipients have been.
Yeah.
So the question I was going to ask is who's making the decision, who gets these? But if it's kind of everybody's getting it, then I don't have as much concern. But like with the TIF, that's been kind of specifically narrowly awarded, and so I just want to make sure everybody's treated fairly.
Yeah, as long as they meet the requirements of the ordinance, they are approved according to this program.
So the other thing, I guess, moving forward, and I don't know how much input we're going to have, is that I would like to see this map broadened. I would like to see this, if we're saying, because you talked about renovation, rehab, reconstruction, the purpose of the neighborhood thing is to encourage that. We have the Exhibit A and Exhibit B. I think we could have Exhibit C, Exhibit D, E, and F. There are places all over our community, neighborhoods that could benefit from a hug given by our city that says, we want to encourage you to do something, some rehabbing, some renovations. What would it harm us to expand that? I don't know who came up with these maps, but why can't we expand this out?
Yeah, I think those neighborhoods, when they were identified, there was I'm probably not recalling the name of those neighborhoods, but there was a conservation kind of area or neighborhoods that were identified back at that time, and that's what that map was reflective of, was those conservation neighborhoods and some of the other goals that were in the community at the time and what we wanted to achieve at that time. And so if that's expanded, again, I think there's some requirements in terms of how those neighborhoods can be identified, but it is something that we could look at.
Well, and we just heard a presentation by the Thrive Group about Norton Froelich. We had all these three hunger deserts, food deserts identified. I think some of those places would really be benefiting from having this impetus, and also making them aware that this is even available for them. I would get totally behind this for our community, because I think it would encourage the average citizen to step up and also people with slumlords, so to speak, to say, yes, we want to help you clean up your property and make it more user-friendly and livable.
Councilor Brecky.
I'm going to piggyback on what the same line of questioning that Councilmember Staley and Kylie, asked you, and it almost was made to order. Were you here when I was asking Candy Hansen the questions about the middle class, the devolution of our middle class, and what we could do as a city? And what I'm envisioning when I talk about a goal, would it be beneficial to staff if the council were to set a goal, as part of a planning process? If you can imagine this with me, that we would establish the goal that we wanted to, starting to enhance our criterias for use of as we utilize these programs to actually not just attract jobs, but attract a certain sector of jobs, a certain kind of business, to try to, expand, and you've talked about that, how you could expand those programming to kind of try to address some of those issues. So if I saw it in a goal phase, the city council would be setting a goal to try to, increase the middle class population, to try to set policies that increase the middle class population. As it applied to programs like this, then that would be part of our action plan. We'd have a goal, we'd have a mission statement, we'd have an action plan, and the action plan would, be the council, coming up with suggestions for staff on how to actually follow that goal or meet that goal by actually helping, come up with the criteria that we would be suggesting that would be added to it, either through ordinance or as, through, suggestions to the administration, to actually not, to expand the offering in such a way that it helped with that, as a branch of increasing that middle class population. Do you track with me? Is that possible to do under this based on what you've said?
I believe I'm following you. So, I mean, yeah, I mean, ultimately, one of the, when we talked about, reviewing requirements in terms of what we wanted to see, some cities have scoring systems in terms of, what are the pay of the jobs, what are the types of jobs. When we had a conversation with the Development Foundation, obviously they're targeting specific industries, but also those industries bring good paying jobs to could be good paying jobs to Sioux Falls. So, if we're targeting the right industries, if we're targeting, those good paying jobs, that would obviously assist with that middle class number. And then, if we can look at ways to improve through our neighborhood programs, housing or, I think kind of the middle class conversation may touch a couple of the programs, where it's from a housing standpoint, it may be more the neighborhood one, but from bringing those jobs and attracting those businesses is probably more from an industrial program. And so each of those could have a little factor in, achieving, that overarching goal of assisting with the middle class.
You understood my question. That's exactly what I was hoping to hear. And then I would just add to that just a statement, again, for the benefit of the council, just to help you guys understand where I'm trying, a direction I'd like to see us go. The wind chill group, I asked the question on a chamber tour of that area, $17 an hour is their starting wage. Those are the kinds of opportunities that we need to focus, on, and maybe be more detailed in our focus on those things in the future, because those are kind of the jobs that raise the bar for everybody, because they're competing for the same employees, and we create, a good environment, and we can do that, through strategic planning and goal setting. And this is one of those areas. It's going in my folder, so you may hear from me on it again. But I'm looking at Mike Cooper and Sean out there as well. Of course, Mike's not going to be here so much longer, but I do see the planning department is key, in establishing the kind of goals that can help with that middle class issue. So thank you for your answer.
Councilor Neitzer.
Piggybacking off of everybody else, that's where I think we're looking at changing this ordinance. That's where I think we all identify the problems, and then as a council and as a city together, we come up with what are our shared priorities. And based on those priorities, then we can figure out what it should look like. That may be changing it and saying, okay, these are the neighborhoods that are at risk. So we're going to change the ordinance and we're going to say these neighborhoods, if you make single family changes to your home, you're going to get a property tax abatement because this neighborhood is at risk and we want to incentivize you. Or we're going to say we'll do multifamily, but we're only going to do it if it's accessible housing, or it's only within a certain corridor or in the core, or we're only going to do your industrial or your commercial if it's pays over a certain wage or whatever else, and just kind of go right at the things that Candy was talking about, rather than just kind of anything over a certain amount, you just get it, and so that's the sort of thing, if we want to, sort of pull those levers and incentivize people, that's what we should be looking at doing.
Yeah, I think that, really codified law identifies really what we have, valuation and use is really how that's identified, but taking a step beyond that to really address what we want to achieve as a city in terms of these programs is what you're talking about, and getting to more specific to the types of uses or requirements that we would look at for these programs.
And one other thought, the other thing too is you've got this tiered approach, which is fine, but we could always think about if there's something that's really, really a big deal to us. I would assume that everybody doesn't have to be the 20, 40, 60, 80. Maybe you could say if it meets these little pieces, these are the 2 or 3 things we really care about. I mean, if this is the big whatever tire plant that's coming into town and it's going to bring hundreds of jobs that are paying $28 an hour, this is the one where we give 0% for 5 years or something like that.
You're getting ahead of some of the conversations we've already had, but yeah, that's been a conversation in terms, especially with like the industrial one. That one is much more broad in terms of when we're talking about jobs and uses and all the types of things that one kind of brings forward. And maybe there's a project that meets a really high valuation but has $15 an hour jobs, and maybe that could still meet the current threshold, to get to our current formula. But if someone, a similar project's going to bring in a large development, but bring in $20 an hour jobs, yes. I mean, we could look at an approach like that as well. We could do that for any of the programs, just, you know, have kind of 2 stages of approval or steps for what level of savings and value you get out of the program.
Counselor Staley?
Well, and going back to the designated areas, I would like to see something in place where an area could petition in, or somehow, you know, if there, I don't know what kind of a massive amount of territory you need to have, but let's say you got a block or 2 along 8th Street that's not part of this, and they say, you know, we'd really like to be included in this so that we can have some rehabs of our fourplexes and our apartment areas. I think that would be a real positive. So knowing, I mean, I don't know who's choosing these areas, but I think it should be flexible and open to the public to have some input into that.
I think these programs have always been intended to be amended through the years, and that's really, you know,
Yes.
the approach that we're taking now is evaluating what those neighborhoods are. And again, in 5 years, those neighborhoods could change or those areas could change. But again, the intention of these programs was always to get something that could benefit those, especially with the neighborhood, those designated areas. And if those changed, you know, we could amend that program moving forward. So.
Thank you. I have a few questions, and then we'll move to the next item because we still have one more item as well. So I hear you asking for some feedback with this. So I have a little bit of that and then a couple questions. Is there a cost for the application?
No.
There's no cost with the application, okay. With TIF there is. I like the requirement of number of jobs or something along those lines when we're talking about recruiting those. And I also like the idea of if this is the next big thing we want to come to Sioux Falls and to the region, that we should have some flexibility to allow for that. But I also don't want to give the farm away. I don't want this to just be all over the place, but having those fresh eyes on some of these programs that were passed in the 80s and even the housing changes to have that affordable housing, I think is important, and having some guidelines, solid guidelines as far as what that would look like. One of the questions I have with the housing is, if, for example, you said there was 4 houses in a row on Menlo, how long do they have to hold that property until they can sell those? Because they were originally a 4-plex, 4 units in a row. And then how long can you sell those after that? Is it 5-6 years until that abatement's done?
You have to be out of the program.
Okay.
And you don't necessarily have to be out of the program, but if the use were to change within the 5 years, so let's just say, maybe an easier example is an industrial building, and let's say they changed it to a retail setting in year 3, then the savings and the reduction is just stopped. They would just be paying full taxes. They don't receive the benefit because they're no longer a qualifying use.
Gotcha.
So with like the example I gave, they did wait the 5 years ultimately and received the benefit for the whole 5 years, and then they sold them that 5th year. But ultimately, if they would have sold them sooner, we would have just discontinued the program for them.
That makes sense. And then my other, I do appreciate you bringing this forward and providing this to the city council as far as just a historical, what you've done the year before. I like the 10-year or however long people are in that program, even if it's a 5-year. I appreciate that, having that eyes on that. My other main question I have with this is I've noticed that there, not to draw attention to any one, but I noticed there's one that has a TIF and a tax abatement. Talk to me a little bit about how that works, because essentially if you have a TIF, you're getting 100% of all the taxes paid and there shouldn't be an abatement? Or help me understand that, because
Okay, so we're gonna, let's see how we can explain this.
And if you need to get back to us as well, I understand that. It's just that one drew my attention.
I'll try to simplify it as much as possible. So Washington Square is the example that you're bringing up that has both, and there's other ones in the past too. I think Sharapa was one that received a TIF and a tax reduction. So really what's happening there is they're not paying as much taxes in, so they're not receiving as much back. So in terms of the Washington Square project, because they have the tax reduction in year 1, they're not paying any taxes or added value in. I mean, there's some base value that they're paying, but they're not, and so ultimately they're not getting any redistributed back to them. Now in year 2, they're paying 20% in, they're receiving that 20% back. Now I am gonna make it more complicated because of the example that of Washington Square. That's a project similar to the project of Jones Lofts, where it's commercial, and then it's single-family condos or units above. And so only a portion of that project qualifies for tax reduction, whereas we're collecting increment from the entire project because of the TIF district.
Makes sense.
So
Yeah, I gotcha. It just drew my attention to that. The other thing that I will thank you for all your research and work with this. When you look at the 2008 to 2018 property tax reductions and the return of our investment on that, I think that this is a good program. I think that that return of investment is serving the city well. But I want to be cautious at how we expand the program and cautious at how much further we make it, making sure it makes sense and meeting those needs of whether it's a big business or it's more affordable housing in our community. How can we incentivize that, but making sure it makes sense? So thank you for your time. Appreciate it. Anybody has questions in the future, please feel free to reach out to Mike Cooper. I want you all to understand that we as a council need to work through the directors. I know the question was asked before, so this is a friendly reminder to please work through Director Cooper, who will refer you to Dustin if that's what he chooses to do. So the person that needs to hear it isn't here, but I'll make sure to follow up with them as well. Citizens can reach out to the planning department, making sure that all the questions are asked and any information is given. We will move to the next item. Thank you again. We will move to the next item of the construction manager at risk presentation. We are running a little behind. I apologize, Mark. So councilors, please be on point with your questions, and we will need to wrap up for sure by 6:30 to allow time for public input. So we will be done with questions by 6:30 at the latest. Thank you.
All right, wonderful. Well, thank you for having us, and do want to announce that we've got our portions of our team here: Shannon Verhey, Deborah Gaikowski, and Trent Lubers. We're here at the request of Councilor Brecky when we were having some discussions during the rate presentation timeframes. Councilor Brecky had said, we'd sure like you to bring forward, really take us through more of why we're recommending the construction manager at risk delivery method. And so we hope this presentation kind of frames up that, and also try to respect your time. I know you've got a council meeting right behind this. So, all right, let's get started. All right, our presentation really is going to go over construction manager at risk, the benefits of this collaborative delivery method. There's a number of different delivery methods. What you're probably most familiar with is hard bid and construction manager at risk. So hard bid is really when an owner hires an architect. The architect draws up a project. Once the owner approves that project, you go out to bids and you select the low bid. And inside that entire bid, you don't know any breakdown when you go into a hard bid situation. When you go into a construction manager at risk, you not only hire the architect right away, but very soon thereafter you hire the constructor. And so we're going to take you through kind of how this gets brought together, but just put yourself in the position of being in charge of building a unique, complex project. Would you want your contractor involved early, or would you want them involved later? And so construction manager at risk really allows you to involve them very early and start to do a number of value add scenarios to answer some questions for you. And then one of our last slides is to give you a look forward on some future council actions. Okay, so it's a team approach. When we do construction manager at risk, there's an owner, City of Sioux Falls, there's an architect, designer, engineer, and then there's the construction manager at risk. So there's three key entities that work together collaboratively to deliver the project. Two key contracts that would be coming before the city council, design engineering firm and the construction manager at risk. And when you're thinking about the phases of a project, while you're in the design, we call that the pre-construction services. That's what we're asking the contractor to be in the room, helping us evaluate different means and methods, and then also giving us firm pricing along the entire journey. And then once we go into the actual project, we're asking them to be the general contractor. So, you know, one of the examples is, I know a number of you just recently toured Gage Brothers. Gage Brothers does precast concrete. if you're going to build a building, you're going to do a design that's either going to look at, are you going to do steel construction for the beams and columns? Are you going to do cast in place concrete, or are you going to do precast? And so that contractor can actually give you a price and a schedule for all three of those while you're in design. So as you're progressing along, a number of decisions are being made, and it's just not you and your designer, your constructors in the room too. So hopefully that gives you some perspective. All right, very collaborative, firm pricing. One of the key things that we want to try to extract the most value out of our dollars, our ratepayers' dollars, but also have an appropriate management of risk. And so that's essentially what this will allow. They're in the room. It's a very transparent, open book process. And then once the owner gets to a point and says, all right, I want to buy out the job or lock in what they call the guaranteed maximum price, that's when you essentially ask the architect to put their pen down, and the contractor takes the plans, the specifications, and a long narrative and provides you that guaranteed maximum price. And that's what they have to deliver the project for. If the owner changes after that, anything, then that becomes a change order. Okay, so just know that the guaranteed maximum price is when the owner at any given time in a project can be before you start construction, it could be 20% into construction, somewhere in between there, that they'll give you a firm price based on the plans, the specifications, and a long narrative of where the current project and assumptions are at. Constructability, just like we talked about with evaluating steel, concrete, or precast, it's extensive contractor input throughout the design. And then the nice thing is once you get, say, a building in the water rec plant, say we're going to do a new blower building, once the design is progressed far enough that they know what the envelope of that building is going to be, the designers can hand the constructor like the footing and foundation plans, and they can go out and start pricing that and getting contractors to start. So the design and ultimately the construction starts to run in parallel tracks. All right, the CMR process, like we talked about, early in, while the design is going on, we call that pre-construction services. So they're in the room, they're adding their constructability expertise, they're adding their pricing expertise from previous jobs, and then once we go into the construction phase, they really change to a general contractor. And again, once the owner asks the contractor to lock in the GMP, that's when the architects provide the current set of plan drawings, the current specifications, and a detailed narrative, and then they price that out. All right, this delivery method is widely being used by the state, local governments, and a number of private entities, and we just wanted to list a few projects that are in the Sioux Falls area that have used CM at risk, and it's become a very good collaborative method to extract the most value, get contractor input, firm pricing throughout the entire design, and then ultimately deliver the project. The water rec plant is going to be a very challenging project, primarily for the first bullet, which is we've got to do the rehabilitation and the expansion while we keep the plant going, and we've got a video here that will show you that just shows you a current project that has you take out one element of the plant while you have to keep some other aspects of it going. Very technical. Cost control is going to be very important to us because we've set rates to deliver this project over from 2020 to 2023. And then we also want to be able to make some timely capacity updates. All right, we got just a short video here that will show you that this is a current project that's underway at the water rec facility, but this is considered the digester complex. This is a new roof that we're placing on. It's a 65-ton new roof that's going on. Essentially, this digester complex was built in the early 80s, and so it's a good indication that it was built very solidly, but we've had to go into each individual digester unit, clean it. You see that paint line, that's an epoxy You know, it really is something there to protect the concrete from the corrosive nature of the gases. But just when it zooms back out, just look at the tightness of this site, but also the rest of that digester complex, those other 3 circle areas, they've got wastewater flowing through them as we speak. And so it's going to be inherently important to have the designer and the constructor working closely with the operations team so we can rehabilitate the plant and keep managing the wastewater. This is a graphic that just gives you a perspective of when you get a full team involved right away. And so if you look at the blue line, for example, right away in the project, you have a significant chance to have an influence on the project. And then over time, that diminishes because the construction is underway and a lot of decisions have been made. On the other side, it's the cost of changes. So early in the project, the more you can get the constructor and the designer and the owner to work together, that magenta or that purple line, there's very low cost to making a change early in the project, gets very expensive to make a change late. And so we just wanted to frame up that for you. We've talked about capacity. So for 2017, the plant had an average daily capacity of 72.2 million gallons per day, 82% capacity. 2018 was extremely wet, had more inflow and infiltration coming into the system. We're just below the 21 million gallons per day rated capacity. We are certainly hoping that we have a drier year in 2019 so we can deliver these projects, but just want to give you a sense of how quickly that can change based on inflow and infiltration. All right, in summary, it's a very collaborative method, gives you firm pricing for the entire journey of the project, and it gives you that constructability review, that contractor that's got the expertise. In the example we shared, whether it would be most advantageous to deliver the project with steel, cast-in-place concrete, precast concrete. There's 1,000 of those decisions made in the journey of a major project like this, and that is one of the key reasons why we're recommending construction manager at risk. Some next steps, January 15th, next week, with your support, we'll bring forward a resolution that would authorize us to use this delivery method. Per state law, municipalities have to use the low bid approach unless the governing body allows you to use a different delivery method like construction manager at risk or design build. That would come forward about mid-January. We're going to release an RFP to solicit the design firms to submit for this project, and then we would anticipate that we would be in front of you with a resolution with the selected design firm in April. About April timeframe, we're going to release an RFP that would ultimately solicit proposals from construction managers at risk, and so then later in the year we would bring forward our recommended construction manager at risk. That's our presentation for you. I want to respect your time, and if we can wrap up for you maybe about 6:15 so you can have a break between your next meeting.
Thank you so much, Mark. Appreciate all your information. Councilor Neitzer, go ahead.
First of all, I'm going to guess you use the CityLink drone to do that?
We did, yes.
They can do some really cool videos of public works projects. I see them on TV sometimes.
That's right.
It's very nice. So I guess the thing I just wanted to, it's more of a statement than anything, is having been through this before, is one thing you mentioned a little bit maybe, but it's important to note is that a lot of jurisdictions use this, a lot of private entities use this. It's very typical now. And the other thing that's important to note is that as you look at it, projects like this is where it works really well, really complicated. The low bid works really well for, like, if you're doing a road, you're not gonna have a whole lot of unknowns. We've all built roads a million times. There's gonna be, it's pretty straightforward. So that's where the event center and some of these other things. And I don't know if you have any specific examples, but I remember that during some of these projects, like the event center, because of using construction manager at risk, there was the ability, I think, to do more value adds as the project went on, and there was cost savings where we got a lot more out of the project, and we were able to add a lot of amenities that maybe we wouldn't have had we not used that delivery method. And I don't know if you have any thoughts or...
Yeah, just in simplicity, I think one of the nice things about construction manager at risk is that once you negotiate the cost of work markup and their general conditions, so their cost of work markup could be somewhere between, just open up the range, 3 to 6% on top of the work. And then they'll have a general conditions, which is how they'll pay their people, their cranes, their dumpsters, their toilets, things of that nature. We call those two things the cost of work markup and the general conditions. Everything after that is open book. So then what we were able to achieve with the event center, we got the design to that certain point where we knew what the outside envelope was, and they released the deep footings and concrete footings. Well, that work came in under estimate. So that's good news. You continue to go forward. As soon as the structural steel package was ready, that was released. I believe that came in under estimate. And so what it allows you to do is get the most value. So if you wanted to enhance the facility in one way, shape, or form, whether it's on finishes, seats, video boards, you're able to continually track what those pluses and minuses are. And then once you get to a certain point in the event center, we said, okay, we're ready to lock in the GMP, which allows you to switch to the schedule and the cost to the contractor. Until then, it's a shared risk and developing the schedule. But I think that would be probably the best example where construction manager at risk, you know, when you talk about hard bid, you hire an architect, they design a project for you. Once you approve it, they release it for bid. You get one price. Construction manager at risk, you negotiate the cost of work markup and the general conditions, and then every schedule after that is an open process. So the footing and foundations, the structural steel or whatever it is, the roofing systems, and it just becomes a very collaborative approach, and then you can really deliver the project in a very efficient, maximum value way.
Thanks.
Councilor Kiley.
Thank you. Director Cotter, thank you for the presentation. Your cost control slide is an excellent slide, and if you want to go to that. The major influence is at the beginning of the project, and so there again, this construction manager at risk allows that construction manager to have influence on the design, and the cost of changes is the lowest at the very beginning too, and the reason behind that is the further you get into it, if you make changes, it gets to the point where it's difficult because construction has progressed so far that to implement some changes, you might actually have to tear down or deconstruct part of the project. So I thought that was a really good slide. Nice job with that. And just very quickly, the GMP is the guaranteed maximum price that, in this case, us, the city, is going to pay. And we know that up front, that we are not going to, let's say it's $1 million, that we are not going to exceed $1 million in the construction of whatever it is that we're building. If the project comes in at, let's say, $750,000 instead of $1 million, who receives that balance in this process? Construction manager at risk.
So it's all how you set that up. The way we've always set those up is that we allow the contractor to have a contingency, but they have to have the city's request or approval to use it. And then if the project finishes without the use of that contingency, those dollars come back to the city. So a very open book process. And the one thing I would always say is that is the guaranteed maximum price, provided there are no justified changes outside of what the contractor was asked to bid on. And right. So, you know, when we talk about plans and specs and a narrative could go all the way down to what kind of cove base you've spec'd out for the offices. If you change that from rubber cove base to wood, that's going to be a change. So just that narrative is very important. A lot of times that takes months to go through because it's so many details, but it's worth it, and then everybody's on the same page with what's expected.
So if there is a balance left over, provided that we haven't demanded additional changes from what was originally outlined, that balance remains with the city. Right. Now, if the project should go over budget and we haven't made any of those changes, then who's responsible in that case?
The constructor at that point. They bear the schedule risk and the cost risk in that case.
Okay, in the hard bid process, let's say it's just bid $1 million and it ended up the contractor, it only cost the contractor that $750,000. Who does the money stay with in that scenario?
Well, it kind of can get complicated because we don't know really what happened inside those. And so in that case, for example, they may have been able to achieve significant margin in some of their schedules that we're not aware of, but they can justify a change order, and we are somewhat, we have to sit down and negotiate that. So they are two completely different processes. But the nice thing is that once you negotiate the cost of work markup and the general conditions, the city's in the room, the contractor's in the room, they open the bids, for example, the footing and foundations. If they come in under, everybody in the room from a collaborative standpoint is going, all right, we're in good shape there. Now let's continue to progress. Let's see where we can get the structural steel and the building envelope. It just becomes a very collaborative process as opposed to that hard bid where all you get is one number and there's more inherent risk.
Thank you, and I have had the pleasure of working on some of these projects and actually saw how that it worked from the design and the contractor and the ability of them working together up front. The contractor might say, well, no, with this current design, we can't run utilities through this area and without doing this or that. So then at that stage, it's much easier to change the design versus boring through concrete and making other changes down the line. So good job. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilor Staley.
Oh, Mark, you made the statement, you have constructability expertise with the construction manager at risk. You said that earlier. And I'm just going to say as a blanket concern I have, I'm going to herald back to the event center. We've got this, to me, it's a very complicated system of who's responsible for what. We have the event center siting. We're still not quite sure who took responsibility for what part of that, but we're moving forward into this new project. We just finished a project, the administration building. People are going to want to say, what kind of, or let me back up, who's negotiating the liability, the warranty aspect? Personally, if I was a bystander looking at what happened with the event center, I'm going to say, somebody dropped the ball on that. We need to make sure that we are protecting every step of this for our citizens, so if something doesn't work, the burden doesn't come back on the city. To me, it should be on the construction manager at risk. So help us to understand who bears the warranty risks when we're negotiating this.
So what we did on a couple of projects, so like the event center, we brought in an owner's rep, someone that's had vast experience with multiple projects. We also brought in third-party legal counsel. And so I haven't had that conversation yet with Stacy Koistra, but we will certainly be entertaining both of those because in both cases, still legally, we were in a good position to go into those disputes. And so probably more to come on that, but we've been down with the volume of construction manager at risk contracts that we've negotiated and really, I think, found a good balance. We'll be working closely with the city attorney's office to take care of those elements.
Because with the event center, and I was just watching that as a bystander, but I got the feeling people were pointing at each other, it's their fault, and then it went behind closed doors, and so the public never really did know who was held responsible at the end of the day. And anything else that we build, if there's a problem with it, I think the citizens want the builder to have to stand up for that. Just like if I was doing something in my own home, I'd come back to the contractor and say, I'd get that down in writing before we start. You are going to be responsible for the quality of this workmanship. Oh, and also for giving me guidance into how I proceed with this. Because, right, isn't that what they're doing? You're relying on their expertise for the construction ability of how deep the footings go, how long the pipe has to be. That's what we're paying for, right? So we don't get into something and at the end of the day, we're told, well, I guess that won't work.
Right. I mean, you involve a team early on, and people go into construction with eyes wide open. Every construction project has risk. There's no doubt about that, and it becomes a shared risk until you, contractually either shift that risk, either it's a portion or 100%. But that's the roles that we'll take on and bring it before you.
Thank you, Counselor. Any other questions? Seeing none, let's turn it over to public input.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Appreciate it. Hang tight in case maybe questions come up. This is the portion of public input. You have 5 minutes. Please state your name for the record, and please keep it to the items that have been discussed on the agenda today. Thank you. Welcome, Bruce.
Hi there, Bruce Danielson. A couple of years ago, I had a little fun with 6,500 of my dearest friends in the Sioux Falls area. We had a little thing called Stop the Funding, because we had such a bad experience with the event center. And then we had the swimming pool disasters that all happened. We now have a new office building, the Romantics Annex over here, that is sitting there with apparently a little bit of a problem trying to get some air conditioning and some heating going in, because we were so much in a hurry to have this building built for a party to happen that we couldn't even stop long enough to consider all of the alternatives and all the problems. We had a siding settlement where it was it $1 million or $1 million? And in the end, we lost about $6 million on the value of that building because we put on some crappy siding that to this day people complain about. We have even the consultant that came in who said there wasn't water coming in the building showed photos of water coming in the building, the damage that had occurred. We don't know what's going on. We had the administration building over here that was built that cost an extra $100,000 to blow the court site out. And that money had to come from somewhere out of that construction manager risk guaranteed maximum price. All of these projects, every time they go over budget in one area or another, that value has to come out of somewhere because we have a guaranteed maximum price and the construction companies don't want to lose money. There's a real issue. City governments should not be doing construction manager risk guaranteed maximum price. We should be going back to the quality work that was being done at the history building, because that archive building that was built, even though you had to sit here and go through the change orders, you knew what was going on that building. There were excellent discussions even about a sidewalk. And for those of us that thrive on this stuff, that was exactly what this body is supposed to be doing. You are the budget keepers. Anytime you let an outside operation control your budget, you're losing. Construction manager risk is a lousy system for government because you are here to protect the people. And I don't see any protections having happened with the event center. And if you would ever like to go through it, I could give you rhyme and verse at the things that happened at the event center that cut value out of that building, from grinding concrete that didn't need to be ground, but because they were trying to do it the cheapest way possible, they put in cement on pan instead of pre-stressed floors. So we had sagging floors that were chipping, so they had to grind the floors. So now we have the look of terrazzo. That was cheap ways to fix a bad situation. And we still have a multi-million-dollar process to replace that siding on that building. And I, for one, believe in what we did with our Stop the Funding, because the people of Sioux Falls did not like the way that building was handled. They did not like the Romantics Annex, and they're not very happy with the parking ramp. Thank you.
Any other public input? All right, we will adjourn. We will see you at 7 o'clock for our regular city council meeting. Thank you for your time.